Selamat sejahtera dan selamat sepupu. It's very popular in Malaysia to talk about what's happening in Singapore, including and especially the oppression of the Singapore Malays. That's right, Singaporean Malay friends. Your Malaysian brothers and sisters think that you're oppressed. So without further ado, are Singaporean Malays oppressed?
If you think it's wild that some people actually believe this, trust me, they do.
Malaysia likes to gaslight Singaporean Malays and Malaysian Malays alike by saying, if we're not careful, one day Malaysia will become like Singapore. I know a lot of you will be like, isn't that a good thing? But like it or not, that is the brain-dead argument that has come out and that mysteriously people fall for even now, especially if they're living in rural areas of Malaysia and live on an information diet of gaslighting, doublethink, and even more gaslighting. If I were Kelantanese or I were a rural Malay living in Malaysia, I would genuinely believe that that is how the Singaporean Malays live. But I don't think that's something that Malay Singaporeans take very seriously. Not when they have CPF, housing, 3.5 to 1, the right to not be skewered by your own community or called a liberal the moment you start behaving in a way that allows you to, shocker amongst shockers, actually be yourself. Although of course, maybe they're oppressed because there's a traffic jam whenever they go shopping in Johor.
But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's talk about the differences between both countries.
Now I know this is a controversial topic, but I want to say that this video comes from a place of admiration and also open questioning. I don't exactly know the answers, but let me just say what I think. I often think of Singapore as the alternate history of Malaysia, where a Malaysian Malaysia could finally be created. I think it is super interesting, especially since both of the countries kind of started out from a common origin point. Both of them were colonial states,
parts of the British Empire on which the sun never set.
And as Lee Kuan Yew once said, Singapore was once the beating heart of the colonial empire, while Malaysia was its body.
Yet today,
Singapore and Malaysia are very different societies. Malaysia literally has the word Malay in it, and it's a lot more Malay dominated. Partly because other populations are migrating out, but we don't talk about that. Whether it's politics, policy, or in population, you're going to see Malay people a lot more. In politics, the Malays dominate because of the population, as they are the largest voting bloc. In policy, there's a full-on ketuanan policy which pretty much discriminates to help the Malays
reform
the injustices of colonialism.
It's supposed to be called New Economic Policy, but now it's become more popular to call it the never-ending policy. And well, racial harmony? Look at all of this and tell me what you think.
Singapore is very different. It's a secular country where for all intents and purposes, you live in a meritocracy, a place where generally speaking there is actual racial harmony and everyone speaks the same language. It was Tharman who did this, but the whole racial balance thing is something that was made possible because of housing and the way that every single HDB, it makes it so that pretty much everyone has a sort of like uniform experience where you get to actually interact with people of other races rather than just as a theory.
And therefore,
if you're one of those people who wants to live by ketuanan, you might feel like you're oppressed. Although I feel like most normal people don't really think in those terms.
Well, don't take my word for it, take Lee Hsien Loong's.
Then Malaysian Deputy Prime Minister Tun Razak visited Singapore to feel the pulse of Singapore Malays. Tun Razak concluded that Singapore Malays were different from Malayan Malays. As there's a Malay saying, rambut sama hitam, hati lain-lain, which means that we may look the same, but our hearts differ. In other words, it was not only Chinese Singaporeans who could not be cowed by threats of riots and mayhem. Malay Singaporeans too could not be easily seduced by appeals to race and religion.
And there is an example I want to mention here.
A while ago, Singaporean Minister of Law K. Shanmugam posted a little video featuring a Meet the People session
during which a middle finger was shown and that you can watch on my channel.
MPS is only meant for residents, and all was going well until these ladies from Monday of Palestine Solidarity come up because they have an agenda and decide to go out and gaslight Shanmugam. Now I don't know how these people thought this was gonna go, especially considering that Shanmugam is famous for destroying The Economist and also destroying Faisal Manap in Parliament. The entire incident goes viral.
Now it's not just Mothership Straits Times, but it also reaches Malaysia as well as
Singapore Raw, my favorite Facebook group, Complain Singapore. Now, coincidentally, these people are Malay, but I don't want to say that it's because they're Malay, therefore they behave like this. I don't think that's fair in any way, shape, or form. But what I want to talk about is the way that the Malay community in Singapore responded to this. Just look at all this. All these comments expressing second-hand embarrassment, sorry on behalf of my community, we're in our holy month.
It's true that you have people like this trying to justify bad behavior, Malaysia, which shows that yes, people have different opinions, but broadly I think there's a very engaged and aware civil society out there.
There wasn't any need for these people to actually do that. Just because these people were Malay, it doesn't mean that they bear the sins of their fellow Malay brethren.
And I'm sure this will come up, though I discourage it.
Some people could interpret things another way. They could say that, well, they are trying to prove that they are good people and they only vote like this because they are in a state of oppression.
But I think that's an uncharitable and unfair assumption about people.
See, I don't think it's totally right to say that it's a Malay issue, especially since their friend, which showed up towards the end, was a Chinese person. But the response from the community was truly incredible, which is actually wow, because from my perspective as a Malaysian, it's so different compared to what would have actually happened in Malaysia. When you look at like the Jagung incident, for example, instead of actually going out and then calling out racist people, these people actually went out and then said, "Tahniah pada peniaga Jagung. Apa salahnya sesekali kita provoke mereka pula?"
And adding on things like these.
If anything, what I expect from Malaysia is that people will just end up supporting ridiculous causes, add to the racism, feed the fire, come up with play victim narratives inside their head as they try to protect people just because of their skin color.
Unless they see Malays joining DAP, of course, in which case they suddenly become heroes of their race and start citing P. Ramlee, which, as we will later see, is slightly ironic to say the least.
From looking at all those comments, you can see that there's a lot more civil decency in the Malay Singaporean community compared to what you'd see in Malaysia on average. Because usually the Malay community will just remain silent if anybody causes trouble or starts mocking other communities, rather than coming out, apologizing, and trying to make things better. The culture difference is night and day, bro.
If you're unhappy with this as a Malaysian Malay, please speak up. A little bit of that so far, but nowhere near enough.
I say on average, just cause there are nice Malay Malaysians as well. It's just that what you expect by default in Malaysia is very different from what you expect by default in Singapore. Because when I look across the causeway from Malaysia, where I am right now, I see a lot more of a progressive, educated, and really just culturally aware society out there. And of course, there's this idea that you have to compete, at least definitely to a greater degree than in Malaysia, where maybe the social policy kind of makes it so that you can do whatever it is that you want right there.
Well, as long as you can avoid moral policing, which some people avoid by becoming moral police themselves. In Malaysia,
we accept Article 153, which respects Malays as the characteristic people. So did Lee Kuan Yew in his last speech in Parliament.
But how much discrimination is there in Singapore really?
Now, I'm not saying that historical oppression did exist. Maybe discrimination in the military, some discrimination when it comes to the workforce or political representation and everything out there.
But it's definitely not easy to prove, and I don't know, I feel like in every society that you could live in, there is a balance and there are trade-offs. But
I've always thought that it would be more freeing somehow if you just didn't have to think about racial superiority or all those narratives out there. But of course, maybe that's just because I'm a biased Chinese person. So again, this is me coming from a point of view of humility and asking you, what do you actually think? Do you feel that you are genuinely oppressed? If you do, then let me know in the comments.
oh yeah, also, would you trade places with a non-Malay in Malaysia? I wonder about that. Let me know.
But I seriously have to wonder how oppressed Singapore Malays really are. If in reality, every single day of their lives is a living hell where they're pushed down, discriminated against, and somehow excluded from the social life of Singapore to the extent that they can never reach self-actualization.
But if that's the case,
why are there so many talented Malay Singaporean actors, creators, and people killing it out there in the corporate world living their best lives? And why do Mu Yusof and Zaki exist? How about La Luna, which was awesome by the way? See, I don't know how many of these people actually realize that most of the Malay world's greatest educational and literary creations were actually based in Singapore.
Or perhaps could have only been born or lived in Singapore.
I mean, University of Malaya started in Singapore, and Mahathir wouldn't have gotten a medical degree if there weren't a University of Malaya in Singapore.
He wouldn't have met Tun Siti Hasma either, by the way.
For that matter, if you didn't have the Malay Singaporean community, you wouldn't have Abdullah Munshi, you would have no Za'ba, no Utusan Melayu, which by the way started in number 64 Queen Street in Singapore. Oh, and by the way,
since some Malaysian Malays like citing P. Ramlee so much,
there would have been no P. Ramlee. And this is an interesting point because a lot of people think that P. Ramlee was like the highlight of Malay culture, but a lot of people don't realize that his career was amazing, but at the same time, it's tragic. The amazing part is where he built his entire career in Singapore at the Malay film productions between 1955 to 1964, but the tragic part is that he came back to Malaysia and then his career was destroyed. Of course, there are many reasons why this could have happened. I mean, like maybe he got old, maybe he just lost his inspiration, or maybe it was true that he was really destroyed by jealousy when he got to Malaysia, backstabbed by one actor after another,
and even journalists apparently,
because they couldn't stand the fact that he was so incredible, even as he lived in a country that was supposed to be more welcoming, forgiving, and supportive of the Malays.
Dia sedih pasal dia datang di balik di my own country, dia kata people tak appreciate dia.
I wonder if that's why Mahathir felt a sense of guilt and decided to actually celebrate him as Malaysia's most iconic artist. But it really is a tragic and sad story that makes us wonder, what would have happened if P. Ramlee had stayed on in Singapore? Would he have continued to thrive, even though he had left Penang and wasn't even living in his hometown anymore? I don't know. It's really hard to say, but I imagine that in that alternate future, it's not inconceivable that he could have actually won an Oscar. But well, that is lost to history. But then, I guess my question is, if P. Ramlee was so oppressed the way that all of our favorite propagandists like to describe the Malays in Singapore, then why was he so successful there? And why do even some people out there, like this guy I was fighting on Facebook, talk about how he moved to Singapore, became successful while trying to defend how incredible Malaysia is, or how it'll be run by Malay leaders even as they enjoy their lives in a secular, multicultural, and very much more rich and successful government?
And so I posed two questions, the first to the Malay Malaysian community and the second to the Malay Singaporean community. To Malay Malaysians I asked, do you feel that ketuanan has been worth it? Well, if you were worried about that, apparently so was Lee Kuan Yew.
They say they are worried about the Malays. I say, so are we. We want to raise their standard of living. And we will, and faster than they can. And at the end of 5, 10, 15, 20 years, a new generation will grow up that will no longer respond to the special VHF they use. They'll be tuning into the multilingual network. They'll be thinking like us, working like us, trained like us, prepared to live with us like Malaysians. Then we win.
Well, that didn't exactly turn out as expected, but history has played out, and Malay Singaporeans, you are the new generation that Mr. Lee was trying to build. So what do you think, Sepupus?
I don't know. Like, that's an interesting question, but it's not one I'm perfectly equipped to answer because I'm not Malay and I'm not Singaporean. But it is something that I am very curious about. But I want to know what you guys think. Who do you think has it better? Malays in Singapore or Malays in Malaysia? Let me know your thoughts, share this video with a friend, and bye.